With discipline, one can bend steel and break stone with only the bare bones of their knuckles. We are the creations of the divines, and within us lies power far greater than any sword or any throne. Through meditation, asceticism, and mastery over mortal flesh, we can achieve the God's work on Nirn. Welcome to Fudge Muppet, my name is Scott, and this is the monk build for Oblivion Remastered. And look, we're not cutting corners here. You wanted a monk, so we're doing a monk. Monks aren't kitted out in armor or abusing the trickery of illusion magic. Hell, I don't even really like that the pre-made monk class has marksman. We are going after the classic bare fist monk archetype with a little monk themed magic to enhance our fortitude and recovery, as well as allow us to perform amazing feats of physical perfection like great leaps or water walking. I like a good stats maxed build, but here at Fudge Muppet we also love role playing, and so we create characters with specifically tailored aesthetics, skills, and gear to deliver a truly unique experience. So this monk build is all clothes, no armor sets, no weapons. I went in to try and best replicate the monk class experience that is found in games like Baldur's Gate 3. This build is also fully capable of the whole elemental destruction magic style thing. However, I did try and use destruction magic in a way which felt less like a firebending wizard and far more connected to the unarmed playstyle. In saying that, this character takes advantage of destruction, and so you can, if you like, use all the fire, frost, or shock hands you like. I'll address that in a later section, but speaking of which, this video will have timestamps breaking up the sections of the video for easy navigation for reference. But without further ado, let's jump straight into character creation and get you building that monk character. The first decision we make in the character creation process is race. Each race comes with its own spread of starting attributes, and each race has one of two origins to pick from, which offers some more flavor for role-playing and comes with slightly altered stats. I've got some stuff to talk about with the monks specifically. Naturally, a lot of people want to be a Khajiit because in their lore, they have several martial arts, monk-themed kind of stuff, and in Skyrim, their claws actually made unarmed do more damage. In Oblivion, however, they only had the initial skill bonus to hand, which means ultimately only a head start on the skill itself, not a higher endgame damage. I also based this character off the vibes and energy of the monk pre-made class art, or even how like Joffrey and the X-Blades. Ultimately, I think a human race delivers well on the classical monk aesthetic, but from a gameplay perspective, we've also got to talk about hand-to-hand. Hand-to-hand in OG Oblivion could have some really strong builds, but the methods of achieving this high damage have been removed incidentally because of the changes to fatigue and how that relates to damage in Remastered. But what's gone is gone, time to look forward. The result ultimately is that hand-to-hand is simply a worse skill in Remastered with a more aggressive ceiling to the damage. So I've picked a race and star sign to give our character a really nice edge. I chose the Breton Race with the Sistress background. Look, Bretons are functionally the best race. They have 50% resistance to magic, which is reason enough, and this basically means that all spells you're on the receiving end of do half damage. And on top of that, the Breton gets a bonus 50 magicka, which is nothing to scoff at. It's functionally equivalent to 25 extra points of intelligence straight out of the gate. As a character which A, will want to be tanky as we run into the fray with fists alone, and B, will be utilizing magic to increase our unarmed fighting potential, then I thought that the Breton is the best pick for the monk. The Sistress background Breton starts off with 40 strength, 50 intelligence, 50 willpower, 30 agility, 30 speed, 30 endurance, 40 personality, and 50 luck. Willpower is going to be a vital stat for our monk, as it largely determines our maximum fatigue pool, and it also determines our magicka regeneration rate. Strength and endurance are the other two really important stats. Endurance largely determines our stealth, and strength determining our damage output with hand-to-hand, in addition to the skill, of course. I'll address these in the leveling sections more so, but just before we move on, let's more thoroughly discuss alternative race choices. Now, of course, the backstory and role-playing is entirely based around a Breton from the Sistress Isles, but it could be easy enough to transplant other races into the same story customary template of an island upbringing and then a later escape. For example, the Khajiit could, instead of the Sistrus Isles beginning, could roleplay that they're from a small island off the coast of Elsewhere named Kanathi's Roost. Anyways, that said, Khajiit is a neat role-playing choice for a monk build, but do be aware that the leveling will be different and the 30 starting willpower isn't that great. A Khajiit also doesn't have the 50% resistance to magic or the plus 50 magicka, which makes intelligence even more important. Other interesting race choices, more so from a role-playing perspective, would be Dunmer, perhaps a monk who has found faith in the divines after the tribunal gods were found to be false. But from more of a gameplay angle, a Nord specifically of the eastern background works out quite nicely, but again, they lack the magical resistance. In general, the monk is overall a weaker build than others, and therefore I found it suitable to make the monk a Breton, the strongest race stats-wise, plus it's easy to make him look like an actual monk as shown in the pre-made class art. If you were to take the exact same build principles, spells and all, but give him blade instead of hand-to-hand, he would end up way more effective. But that's just no fun, is it? So, Sistrus Breton. I made him physically look like he would be a UFC fighter, just that head that looks like it can take a lot of punches, if you know what I mean. As we punch our way through rats and goblins and eventually arrive at Emperor Uriel's Septum, he will read the tea leaves and divine the stars, telling us our daily zodiac read. We are about to pick a birth sign. There are several options, but above all, for our monk build in particular, I would highly recommend the Lord Sign. The Lord Sign offers 15% extra magic resistance, which really for a Breton is overkill, but its main offering is 15 points of shield or armor, all the same thing. Essentially, by picking this star sign, you, while completely in the nude, have the equivalent armor to someone wearing an ebony cuirass, or rather, Daedric boots and Daedric gauntlets. Consider a full set of fur armor with the shield would give you 16 armor rating. Anyways, point is that 15 armor for free is really damn good, especially for our character who in the monk theme is not going to be stacking on light or heavy armor. Clothes is the vibe. So importantly, this Lord Sign choice will give us a leg up defensively, stacking with our shield spells through alteration as well, allowing us to maintain the monk aesthetic and overall theme. As we picked a Breton, we will also have an innate bonus of 50 points to our magicka, which does make signs like the mage less necessary. However, if you don't care for the Lord Sign and you are picking a race other than Breton, well, you could use the mage sign to compensate and bring your magicka pool up by plus 50. But to be honest, I would still recommend the Lord Sign for almost every monk build, primarily because these extra defenses are really great if you want to be a clothing only monk. It's fantastic. Alright, so birth signs sorted, go for the Lord Sign, time to move on through the sewers, punching our way through Mythic Dawn assassins, and eventually we fail to protect the Emperor from death. This is the point where we pick or create our class. Scrolling through the pre-made classes, we come to the monk. Quick and cunning with the empty hand, they are strong in spirit. Monk has an interesting mix, and it's something we're just gonna have to change. It has stealth as the specialization, agility and willpower for the favored attributes, acrobatics check, alteration check, athletics check, hand-to-hand check, marksman, okay, security, wait, a locksmith monk, thievery, sneak, what are we stealing? Look, Oblivion has some funny pre-made classes that at the very least, don't match up with my idea of what the class should be. We're going to build our own monk class. Firstly, I think it is very important that we pick our combat specialization to primarily help our hand-to-hand skill level as soon as possible. Plus, it will help our athletics get tip-top so we can close distances quicker, as well as our block skill. But really, the magic skills are easier to level than the combat skills, and the magic is really only 2 main skills and a support one, but I'll get to that. Ultimately, hand-to-hand is the central skill and vital to get up as fast as we can. You could go for magic specialization if you prefer, but man, definitely not stealth. For the favored attributes, we are going to pick speed and endurance, and this is really just to bring up our lower stats to 35, just to round out the character a little more. If you pick a different race, then this might not be necessary, and instead, say if you were a Khajiit, you would be wanting to pick endurance or strength, depending on your background, and willpower for sure. Anyways, as for the monk's major skills, some will be staying, some will be going. Firstly, athletics and acrobatics are staying. It feels so on point for a physically excellent individual like some athletic Shaolin monk type character, plus it does give us more maneuverability in general. Hand-to-hand, for the obvious reasons, is the most important skill for the monk, essential to the no weapons playstyle. We also want block to make those arms of ours made of steel as we deflect blade and axe with our guard up. As funny as that may be, in a world of magic we can always justify it either through the residual effects of alteration spells, or perhaps like a divinely sourced resilience through meditation and prayer. From a functional perspective, block is just needed bad so that we don't die. So we have 4 major skills that represent the raw physicality of the monk. Now we add in a little magic. Firstly, alteration. This is essential for a few reasons. Chief among those, shield spells. These are going to be able to get our armor rating matching a light armored character of a similar level, or even more thanks to the Lord Sign's plus 15. Consider that the widely accessible shield spell Defend, which gives 15% shield for 30 seconds, will essentially give us a total of 30 armor for that period, more than someone sporting a full set of mithril minus the shield. Of course, we will also make even greater, longer duration spells later, but ultimately alteration is vital to get around the fact that we are wearing just pants or a robe. And that's not even counting enchantments yet. Alteration also has open lock spells, which are just convenient for looting dungeons and such. It also has feather spells for carrying said loot. But very on theme for a monk, there are alteration spells such as water breathing and water walking, which can represent that mythical tier physical peak conditioning that only exists in stories. Restoration is a major skill we pick that was surely missing from the pre-made monk class, and yes, it has self-healing and healing of others, which is very on theme, but most importantly, the Fortify attribute and Fortify skill spell effects, which were of such great use to our character. Creating a Fortify hand-to-hand spell ASAP along with certain items will allow us to reach a hand-to-hand level of expert at the lower levels. I'll discuss more about this in the early and mid-game sections, but in general, these spells will allow us to represent the peak physical conditioning of a monk, and Restoration also has Restore Fatigue spells, which are very cheap and very useful, especially when we can cast one at the start of battle and essentially never run out of stamina. I love it. The final major skill to discuss is Destruction, and this one requires a little bit of nuance. It all depends on how OP you want to be, or how you want your thematic experience to go. On one hand, you can use all varieties of touch elemental spells to represent that way of the 4 elements kind of experience. You could even cast targeted destruction spells to simulate some kind of Ki Blast or Dragon Ball Z tier thing. The option is there, however, I kept my usage a little more grounded for the most part. Now, I see a lot of monk builds use illusion for paralysis, and I just kind of find it out of character. Like, you can do it, and I suppose you can be simulating a bit of a monk with a paralysis chop kind of thing, but overall, the illusion school makes it feel more ninja to me. I don't know, maybe a shadow monk, but you'll be tempted to use invisibility and control spells, and I don't know, it just didn't fit the vibe that I was going for. I wanted this kind of fair fight kind of feel for the monk. Like, you don't have some sort of Ip Man character just paralyze a guy with a spell and then beat the living daylights out of them while they're frozen and can't fight back. It just feels wrong to me. I like the idea of a monk that can face their enemies with dignity, more Matrix fight scene style energy. Anyways, picking Destruction as a major skill gives you those options, but also gives us the freedom to use Drain Fatigue spells straight out of the gate, and without a lot of worry about training the skill further. If you didn't know, if your fatigue drops below 0, not to 0, but below, you will fall over. What's cool about this is that when we are fighting an enemy and we are blocking power attacks and wearing them down, making them exert themselves, we can then use this Drain Fatigue touch spell, which I simply called Push 'em. When they already have low fatigue from exertion, this spell will drop their fatigue below 0, forcing them to the ground. It's cool where you put your hands forward and it almost feels like you're just giving them a little push, and bam, they lose their footing and fall down. This feels more like you've knocked someone to the ground with a little 1-inch punch or a little push in a natural kind of way, versus just straight up paralysis hacks. Also, another note about Destruction, but in the early game it will give us touch spells to deal with ghosts attributes and enemies that cannot be hit. However, at journeyman level hand-to-hand skill, our fists will actually be able to hit enemies like ghosts that cannot be usually affected by physical things, which makes it handy. Ultimately, I thought this mix of skills best represented the monk archetype character. So to summarize, the major skills are acrobatics, athletics, hand-to-hand, block, alteration, destruction, and restoration. Make adjustments as you desire, but I think these skills are both really great for gameplay and or create a really cool vibe for the monk. But for now, it's time to leave the sewers and get into the early game with our sistress background Breton character. Born under the Lord sign with level 1 attributes of 40 strength, 50 intelligence, 50 willpower, 30 agility, 35 speed, 35 endurance, 40 personality, and 50 luck. Leaving the sewers, we will have a few priorities. We are role-playing an honest man who has found wisdom and peace within the gods, after a former life of which he is ashamed. I will go deeper in the backstory and role-playing sections, but as for the early game, we are leaving the sewers, and there are a few tips to take account of. Firstly, swim across the lake and get to Vilverin, take down the bandits, and by the tent there is a hand-to-hand book we can read and get a free skill up. Secondarily, we are going to go to the arena district of the Imperial City. Outside the arena, there are two fighters, the Red Guard woman Branwen and the Argonian named Salith. We can watch them for a short time, and suddenly we will get a +5 to our hand-to-hand skill, which is a very nice head start. Arguably, you could, if you wanted, avoid this now and instead do it when your hand-to-hand skill is much higher and you want to take advantage of the skill boost then. However, I will say that we will have fortify hand-to-hand spells that boost our damage. So really, I think it's best to just get the leg up at the start, and we'll also want to get to a natural skill of 50 quicker so that we can hit ghosts and such with our fists as soon as possible with the Journeyman milestone perk. So watch them and get the hand-to-hand boost of +5. Now, the next bit is a bit sus, but I have weaved it into the backstory and role-playing. We need to retrieve the bands of Kwang Lao. They are just nearby in a very hard locked chest. You can either take a crack at lockpicking this or steal the key from Branwen, but either way, we want to get the bands. We will be returning them after we're done with them, but don't worry, it's somewhat justified in the backstory. Anyways, these bands of Kwang Lao are technically light armor, but we only need them for the enchantment. Yes, they will affect our spell effectiveness marginally, but the boost to our hand-to-hand damage is so worth it. The bands fortify the hand-to-hand skill by 20 points on self, which is immense. Without even a single natural hand-to-hand skill level up, as a Breton, we start with 25. Get the book by the tent at Vilverin, 26. Watch these guys for a minute, +5 hand-to-hand. Now we have 31 hand-to-hand skill, and then we take the bands of Kwang Lao, and our functional skill damage is equivalent to 51 hand-to-hand, all at level 1. It's a great start. Alert, by the way, keep the wrist irons. These will be useful to enchant later for when we don't need the bands of Kwang Lao anymore. If you happen to do a Khajiit version of this build, you would have more like a 41 natural hand-to-hand skill boosted to 61 with the bands. However, you would be missing 50 extra magicka and 50% magic resistance. Just a consideration. Anyways, the other thing to address here while in the Imperial City is the Tower Stone, which is right across from the Imperial Waterfront. Here we can get the Warden's Key ability, which allows us to unlock a hard lock once per day, and the Armorer's Hand ability, which fortifies armorer. That's not of much use to us, but it does unlock the Fortify skill effect, which we will be using early on for spellmaking, so I like to grab this stone for now. Moving on, we want to go to Joffrey at Wayne Priory and deliver the Amulet of Kings. We will take this mission seriously and attend to it with relative haste. For this character, I really felt like tackling the main quest felt urgent, and from a role-playing perspective, I went ahead and rescued Martin, broke the siege of Kvatch, and found safety at Cloud Ruler Temple pretty soon. I will also say that Cloud Ruler Temple fits the vibes so well aesthetically for this monk character, a good base and pseudo player home. Once Martin is safe, it then made sense to me to go and explore other things. Firstly, the monk will notice Frostcrag Spire and investigate, an abandoned wizard's tower, a place for solitude and contemplation for the monk, but in gameplay terms, it's also where we can get a spell-making altar. We will have to save up some gold and head on back to the Imperial City to speak with Orellenway and buy a set of Mage Tallow candles. bundles. But as we are a character with no weapons and no armor, we actually sell the bulk of our loot, so it's not too hard to make some dosh as the monk. This will open up spellmaking to us. This is where I create the Push 'em spell. This will require that you already know the Drain Fatigue spell, but you can buy the Minor Innovation spell from Druja in the Skingrad Mages Guild with ease, which has the Drain Fatigue effect. Then we can go ahead and make the spell Push 'em with a Drain Fatigue of 100 points for 5 seconds. In retrospect, I could have made this an even shorter duration to cut the costs down more, but like I mentioned in the character creation section, when you can force an NPC's fatigue below 0, they will fall over. The trick to this is watch when an enemy has exerted themselves first. So after an enemy power attacks or swings a bunch or even blocks your hits, you kind of have to guess when they have lower fatigue and then just hit them with this and go ham, punching into them as you have the advantage. I will also mention that later down the line, as your hand-to-hand skill gets stronger, your strikes do more and more fatigue damage to the opponent, meaning that spells like this would be more effective, being easier to trigger the fall down. Anyways, this is a cheap, accessible spell that we can use strategically in combat for crowd control or just to wail on a single enemy. Other spells to make that are useful are going to be shield spells, restore fatigue spells, and most importantly, at this time, fortify hand-to-hand spells. The magnitudes available will be largely determined by your skill levels of magic. First thing I would do is make a more powerful shield spell. I would make a shield spell called Guard Up, 25% shield on self for 20 seconds, or you could lower the magnitude and higher duration, up to you. I'd also recommend spending a little time training up your restoration skill, but ideally you would be able to make a spell called Throwdown, raising Fortify Hand by 40 points for 20 seconds. This really boosts damage a lot at these early stages. Functionally, with the bands of Kwang Lao and the spell, your hand-to-hand damage is equivalent to a 90 skill level. You can also use Fortify Strength spells to further boost damage, but just keep in mind that these Fortify spells really only factor in the early and mid-game. Once our hand-to-hand skill is 80, we have the bands of Kwang Lao make it 100 alone, so we don't need to use a spell anymore, and the same goes for Strength. Once that's at 100 at level 16, further boosts to Strength won't increase our damage. Last thing before I move out of the whole custom spells bit, I also want to mention a spell I made called Breathe Fast, which restores 15 fatigue for 5 seconds. This is a great little spell to use when fatigue is low, because we really don't want to be running out of that in battle. It makes a big difference for us to be able to block and attack effectively all the time. You will see all of these spells in practice, but let's talk about the leveling path for attributes. At level 2, we put +5 into speed and endurance, bringing those stats up to par at a level of 40 each, and the remainder 2 points go into willpower. Then for level 3, we adjust a little, putting a +5 into strength, as well as endurance, and the remainder +2 into willpower. We repeat this until level 6, where we have 60 strength, 60 willpower, and 60 endurance. From here on out, it's very simple. We just put +4 into strength, willpower, and endurance until each are at 100, which will happen at level 16. Nice and simple. But you may have noticed we haven't really touched that much on gear yet. Well, that's because outside of the bands of Kwang Lao, there really isn't that much to do. We have no weapons, no other armor. For the most part of the game, I was just rocking breeches and the bands of Kwang Lao, and that's about it, aside from some enchanted jewelry that I found throughout the early game. You could also go for the monk robes, which can be found in several places, even on bandit hedge wizards, and I do so in the late game, but this was kind of like a sort of earn-it motivated decision. I just enjoyed the progression of this kind of breeches-only bare-knuckles fighter eventually getting to a level where he fights in his robes and looks cool and mystic and stuff. Character evolution, but it's all literally inconsequential as our armor is derived from star sign, enchantments, or spells. You can really wear whatever clothes you like. For this character, I actually really focused on doing the Fighters Guild, bringing your martial skills to do some good in the world, plus make a living. During the quest, More Unfinished Business, which is in the latter half of the Fighters Guild questline, you get a guaranteed leveled quest reward, a Ring of Aegis, which basically is a ring with a shield enchantment. Shield enchantments are a big help for our character. There is a level 1 to 4 version for 12 points of shield, a level 5 to 9 for 15 points, and a level 10 plus version for 18 points of shield. I ended up getting the middle version for 15 points of shield. It just happened to be around the level I was naturally at this point in the questline, because aside from saving Martin and getting him to Cloud Ruler, I basically just focused on the Fighters Guild. Anyways, that ring is a massive bonus to our character. The level 5 to 9 version with 15 points in combination with the Lord Sign's natural 15 points gives you a total of 30 points of armor while wearing nothing but breeches and the ring. And this is not even factoring in your shield spell. The guard up spell I suggested of 25% would take us to 55 armor rating, or a tad more because of the bands. By the way, for those who don't know, the game uses points of shield and percentages interchangeably at times, but really thinking about points as a percentage is easiest. Basically, your armor value is a percentage reduction on damage taken. So if you have 30 armor, you have a 30% reduction on physical damage taken. This percentage goes all the way up until it's capped at 85%, meaning the most physical damage reduction that you can have is 85%. Anything in excess is functionally the same. I thought I'd just clarify how that works for most people who get tripped up with the armor using points at times and then percent at other times. One thing about this build is that it really is quite simple in function. Hit a shield spell, hit a fortify hand-to-hand spell, run in and start swinging haymakers. Use restore fatigue spells to get your fatigue back through the battle, and try and push them every now and then. Of course, like I said in character creation, you can really amp up the destruction magic side of things with elemental touch spells, but I personally wanted to keep it as close to that open hand monk style as possible. Vary as you please. With this Breton monk, you should, at level 10, have 76 strength, 50 intelligence, 76 willpower, 30 agility, 40 speed, 76 endurance, 40 personality, and 50 luck. As you surely know, we here at Fudge Muppet love role-playing characters with their own unique backstories and motivations, alongside aesthetic decisions and overall vibe choices to deliver a certain gaming experience. I thought that now you understand the foundational parts of character creation and the early game leveling, as well as the fundamentals of the build, I figured now would be a good time to talk role-playing, factions, and backstory, something you can listen to while you get your character through those initial levels. So without further ado, let's get into the backstory, and then after we will see how this informs the role-playing and quest choices before rolling on to the mid and late game leveling. The monk's name is Alfred Dubois, born in Gonfalon Bay, the largest city on the largest isle of the Sistris archipelago. He was one of a large family of commoners, 3 elder sisters, 2 elder brothers, and a younger brother as well. The family worked a tavern near the docks, serving sailors, fishermen, and Imperial Navy, heaping their bowls full of seafood broths and filling their tankards with beer, all calm and collected as the nightly brawl broke out. Alfred was quiet but curious and was kept away from the patrons after he inadvertently started a fight one night, pointing out to 2 men that he had seen them both with the same woman, and how that is not how Mara intended marriage to be. He was often given the task of messenger or other menial tasks of delivery which could be completed quickly, and so after, or at times instead of, he often wandered the streets, exploring, ever curious. He'd listen to sermons about Kinnereth while perched in the rafters at the chapel. He enjoyed the words of the priests, and they stirred his imagination with the grandeur of creation. At the ports, he'd count the sailors coming off each ship and take note of what they had brought to shore. Let me tell you that this stage of life was rather boring, but that all changed one day when Alfred was 13, watching the docks as usual when the most exotic ship he had ever seen arrived. Its sail was fan-shaped and fully battened, a reddish-brown colour, and the amidship was low and curved. He asked some strangers about it, and none knew much until an older fellow said, "I think that's a ship from Ezrionet." Alfred heard no more from that man, but he saw men unloading the vessel, great urns full of nutmeg, cloves, and hot peppers. He watched and listened, and was most surprised when he saw a talking monkey the size of a Breton. Ever curious Alfred followed this talking monkey, and immediately asked, "What are you?" The monkey man smiled and then laughed, and Alfred stood entirely confounded. His name was Kwang Lao. He was of the Tang Mo, the people of the 1,000 Monkey Isles in far-off Akavir. As Alfred would soon learn, Kwang Lao was once a slave of the Kamal, the ice demons of his northern home continent, and he escaped and was saved by a trader from Ezrionet, the captain that he now serves. Alfred's eyes lit up. His was not a life of slavery, but was one of boredom, and he was destined for naught. Alfred followed and begged to be let aboard, but the captain of the ship denied him each time. Kwang Lao would defer to the captain's decision, but there was a little glint in his eye that shone at Alfred. Keep trying. Alfred followed them into the night, and of all places they ended up in his family-run tavern, a rowdy place of brawls. They sat and they ate, and for once his father was pleased with him, as it has appeared he had led new customers here. He had not. Most assumed Kwang Lao was some kind of Khajiit breed, or even an Imgur of Valenwood maybe, but with such a distinctly foreign appearance, he earned the ire of the cruel and xenophobic. Alfred, having appeared at the tavern, was now brushed into the chain of command by his sisters, serving bowls of broth and making himself useful. Alfred didn't mind this time. He was fixated on Kwang, that monkey man who wore nothing but breeches and a leather band around each wrist as he sat lapping bisque. It was not long before someone picked a fight, and well, it was the most incredible thing that Alfred had ever seen. Kwang was like an acrobat, bouncing from walls, his arms like whips, lithe and darting from strange angles, closed fists snapping upon jaws made cracked and bruised. He flowed through his attackers like a dolphin through waves, leaping up to dive back in with a hand like a spearhead, dropping them to the floor. There was a ruckus afterwards, and Alfred would watch them leave as he was instructed to clean the place. The crew left to their ship, ready to set sail come morning. And the sun was bright, and the winds were strong, and so that ship crew left Gonfalon Bay and headed to their next destination. It was on the second day that a stowaway was discovered, and, well, by discovered I mean this. Alfred, hiding in a barrel, had become cramped and was desperately thirsty, and figured that they were far enough away from High Isle that they wouldn't turn back. So he burst forth and simply asked for some water. His gamble proved correct, though it was only thanks to Kwang Lao and his advocating that stopped the young Alfred from being tossed overboard. The captain was a grouchy old fellow, but warmed to him in time. And that was that. That is how Alfred Dubois joined the crew of the Skelter. He scrubbed that deck every day, did every terrible menial job, but he was happier than ever. He was free, roaming the seas, adventure. And too, he had a mentor, Kwang Lao. Alfred spent many years on the ship named the Skelter, and in time he had become a respected crew member and quite the pugilist himself, Kwang Lao's apprentice. He would fight in rings for gold while at the many ports of their travels and spend much of it that same night on booze and women. He had been from Ezrionet to Inslee, to Solitude and Blacklight to Hergaith and Oridon, all corners of the world. By the age of 23, he had trained for 10 years under Kwang Lao and was a seasoned fighter. He enjoyed the gold, the fights and the women, but most of all, he loved the adventure. Then they came upon struggles, new hostile regulations on certain goods and, well, the captain of the Skelter had to turn to alternative methods to make money. No longer an honest trader, he had turned to smuggling moon sugar from the ports of St. Charles and into the very heart of the Empire. Alfred had never seen the Imperial City, a metropolis beyond all wonder, and as they moored in the waterfront, they offloaded their reputable goods and carried them on shore. As night fell, they went to find some fun, as was customary. Most of the crew returned as the moon sat high, and most went to sleep on board, except for Kwang Lao and the other muscle assigned to the captain, including Alfred. They accompanied the captain on this shady deal with the moon sugar buyer. Firstly, the buyer was late, and secondly, sleeves of chainmail peeked beneath his cloak. It was a sting operation. Kwang was the first to realize and kicked the false buyer to the ground and yelled to wake the crew, but Imperial guards came charging from hiding spots. An arrow shot into the captain's throat, and with a simian screech, Kwang Lao erupted into a fury of 1,000 fists, caving breastplates with bloody knuckles. Alfred was held at knife point, and most of the crew was quickly held down or killed if they resisted. Kwang Lao fought on until his last breath, covered in slash wounds, dripping blood as he stood, still throwing punches, until he finally collapsed. He had killed 3 armored soldiers. They stabbed at his corpse more to make sure that he was truly dead. Those who lived, including Alfred, were bound in shackles and lined along the waterfront, ready to be taken to prison. Alfred cried until the sun rose as bodies were heaped onto carts to be disposed of. As he was pushed along, he turned back and saw a Redguard woman, slipping the bands of Kwang Lao from his wrists and pilfering the goods of the dead while the body cart was unattended. Alfred tried to take a mental image of the woman, but was rushed off and thrown into the Imperial City dungeons, where he would be forced to relive the death of his friends and forced to come to terms with the wrong that he had partaken in. For the first time in many years, he prayed. Now that you have an idea of how the monk came to be in the Imperial City prison and how he came to know Kwang Lao, the Tangmo pugilist, on the crew of the Skelter, it seems Alfred Dubois' prayers would be answered. Signs were shown. The Emperor was escaping assassination through his very cell, and more than that, he had seen Alfred's face. Alfred will fail to protect the Emperor and be sent to Joffrey with the Amulet of Kings in his possession. This divinely ordained circumstance, this mission from the gods, so to say, is what will truly transform Alfred from a mere pugilist sailor into a man who deepens his connection to the divines through prayer and contemplation and use their blessings to strengthen his body, his vessel, which will be used in service of the gods' plan. However, fresh out of jail, he will investigate the Imperial City, hoping to come across the Redguard woman who stole his mentor's bands, and this is when he finds, in the Arena District, Branwen and Salith training. He watches for a while, learning some techniques, but most of all, he confirms that it was she who stole his mentor's braces. He will sneak the key at night and unlock her chest, taking only the bands which belonged to Kwang Lao. He will wear them with pride as he continues to become a master of the fist. As a note for the future, when the monk has continued in his transformative journey and the bands of Kwang Lao no longer have anything to teach him, he will return to the Arena District and notice Branwen still training, and in a small mercy, he returns the bands to her chest, and perhaps she will find them useful. A sort of sentimental, let the wisdom of the bands live on and serve another kind of thing. This way, Kwang Lao lives on in a spiritual sense. Like I mentioned in the early game section, I really think that the monk would take the Amulet of Kings to Joffrey very quickly and then go ahead to find Martin Septim with great urgency. I also really like this because then he can go to Cloudruler Temple and join the Blades. And Cloudruler Temple in general looks really on theme for the vibes. He will also be able to unlock Frostcrag Spire, which is a wizard's tower, but for him it will be a place of solitude and contemplation. Also, there is the Spellmaking altar, so that helps. But Alfred Dubois will be overwhelmed with his new station as a protector of the new Emperor, charged with preventing the Mythic Dawn from unleashing Mehrunes Dagon upon the world. He will pursue the Fighters Guild in these early stages for work and to help everyday people, grounding himself in their struggles and problems. At the core of the monk, he will value an organization like the Fighters Guild, a place to train and recruit people to make a living helping others with skills that can so often be used for crime. For example, instead of a poor farm boy with some muscle getting into banditry or raiding, they instead can join the Fighters Guild and use their natural skills to defend people from monsters or the very bandits that they could have become. He, on the Skelter, witnessed what happens when suddenly your trade can't provide you the gold that you need. In their case, they turn to smuggling moon sugar. Anyways, the idea is that the monk values honesty, dignity, and justice, and therefore thinks that the Fighters Guild is a great organization which he joins and one day will lead. Due to the nature of our character's arcane abilities, joining the Mages Guild is also something you can do if you like, if you're wanting to search for more things to do. However, it is not important to do so from a role-playing perspective. It probably goes without saying that the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood are not good options for role-playing the monk, and the same could be said of several of the Daedric quests, chiefly princes like Molag Bal or Mephala, though Daedric quests for princes such as Azura or Meridia or maybe even Boethia could be done. The monk has faith in the divines, but he is a meditative, spiritual person, not a zealot, and so when approaching Daedric quests, think more of what they ask you to do rather than who they are. At least in some cases. I'm basically trying to give you wiggle room in the role-playing. Boethia's quest, for example, is just a tournament. The Knights of the Nine quest line, in terms of what it wants you to do, is a good choice. Pilgrimages, holy relic questing, defeating Umaril and such are all things that the monk would do. It's just less about the armor and weapons. In some way it can be fun doing the whole quest, not even using the relics yourself when you don't have to. In summary, for this character, I would really think about him in terms of a humble, good-natured person who has a personal understanding of what draws people to a life of crime. He is merciful, but also fierce in his protection of the innocent. He is in no way a pacifist. Alfred Dubois, the monk, will live his life in service to the divine will of the gods, serve Martin Septim as best as he can, and serve the people who cannot defend themselves. Alright, so now you have a very good grasp of the character on both a gameplay and role-playing level. Let's get into the mid-game leveling and see the full expression of our build take place. By this point, we will have saved Martin from Kvatch and joined the Blades at Cloud Ruler Temple. We will have gotten the Spellmaking altar at Frostcrag Spire, and we'll use that place as a little fortress of solitude for contemplation of the spiritual and arcane, and we will have made significant progress, if not finished, the Fighters Guild. You should also have the Ring of Aegis, meaning that we are running around in breaches with at least 30 armor, and that's before we apply our shield spell. We have a lot of defense despite our bare chest. Our natural 65% magic resistance is also crazy good. As I mentioned in the early game section, we will be continuing with the +4s to strength, willpower, and endurance until each of these stats are at 100 at level 16. At this stage, we get the maximum possible health, maximum magic regen, a big boost to our fatigue pool, and max melee damage boosts from strength. From this point on, I started investing the +5s into agility and intelligence, with the remainder +2s into speed. Arguably, you could flip agility and speed, but since we have no armor on, plus we have higher athletics and acrobatics, and we also have fortify speed and athletic spells, I elected to boost agility faster, as it determines about a third of our fatigue pool, and it determines our stamina regeneration rate, though we already boost this with spells. Intelligence, by increasing our magic pool, increases our spell casting ability. How you divvy up the virtue points from level 16 onwards is really kinda up to you. It's not that important after you've got strength, endurance, and willpower to 100. With new capabilities of skill, we have access to new spells. The push 'em and guard up spells were staples that I continued to use, but I really prioritized getting that restoration skill up so I could create some truly awesome playstyle boosting spells. One of those spells was Square Up, and it was my go-to enter battle spell for the mid-game. It restored fatigue by 20 points for 30 seconds, fortified block by 40 points for 30 seconds, fortified hand-to-hand by 20 points for 20 seconds, and fortified willpower for 40 points by 30 seconds. I realized I actually made a mistake and fortify hand-to-hand should have been 30 seconds, but the reason we went with lower magnitude is because by this point, I was at that 60 to 70 range of raw hand-to-hand skill level, and the bands of Kwang Lao already boosted by 20, so I just didn't need a 40 hand-to-hand boost anymore, like I had with my earlier throwdown spell. The boosted willpower increases magic regen and total fatigue pool by proxy, so it's really nice to include. You can also make your own preferential adjustments. I do feel as if the restore fatigue is such a great mainstay, meaning we can deal out damage consistently and block consistently, but you can cut the fortify block, for example. A lot of these spell recommendations will vary depending on your skill level, but I'd really try and prioritize getting restoration high quickly, because it is what can be used to buff our characters so well and make them more feasible. There are some other fun spells to create with restoration, such as one of my favorites that I made called Lotus Sprint. It gives water walking, fortify athletics, and fortify speed, both for 100 points, all for 20 seconds, and this is what allows me to Naruto sprint across lakes and long distances. Also, a simple leap high jump spell, fortifying acrobatics by 100 points for 20 seconds, or even if you feel like you want to make a little extra cash easy, I made a spell called Holy Tithes, which fortifies mercantile by 80 points and personality by 100 points for 10 seconds. One thing to keep in mind, as we get to level 17, Oblivion gates will now have transcendent sigil stones, meaning we can now find very powerful enchanting effects. There is of course the save scum method, where you can just save before picking up a sigil stone to close the gate and reload until you get your desired enchantment, but whether you do so is up to you. However, I did not, and managed to find a Fortify Magic Sigil Stone, a Resist Magic Sigil Stone, and a Fire Shield Sigil Stone, though a normal shield, shock shield, or frost shield could work just as well. I began using these to build out the final fit, which leads me into the late game section. Entering the late game as the monk, at level 20 we should have 100 strength, 70 intelligence, 100 willpower, 50 agility, 48 speed, 100 endurance, 40 personality, and 50 luck. The protocol from here is the same since level 17, just keep boosting intelligence and agility with the +5s and then the rest into speed, though like I said you can swap agility and speed around if you like. But to keep on what I was talking about at the end of the mid-game section, we were talking about transcendent sigil stones and their enchantments. I was at the stage in the late game where I no longer needed the bands of Kwang Lao, and even though they had been stolen, I now sneaked them back into that chest that I took them from, let the bands serve someone else. Remember those wrist irons that I said to hang on to from the start of the game? Well, I enchant those with a sigil stone with resist magic, naming them the Prisoner's Fate, which is kind of an allusion to the metaphysical stuff in Elder Scrolls lore, but really it's just kind of a cool name for some enchanted wrist irons. Now, these will give 20% resistance to magic, taking our natural 65%, thanks to Breton and the Lord sign, and bring it up to 85% magic resistance, which is pretty damn powerful. I also enchanted an amulet with a Fortify Magicka sigil stone, calling it Magicka Well, and it boosts Magicka by 50 points. And finally, as I felt more powerful and enlightened, I donned a monk robe, which I enchanted with the Fire Shield sigil stone, offering 25 points of fire shield, which is basically 25% fire resistance and 25% shield. I named this the Habit of the Divines. Now, you could alternatively use frost or shock shield or even just a normal shield, whatever you kind of have, it doesn't really matter. But with this setup, my level 23 monk had 55 points of armor, and that is without any shield spell yet, just a combination of the Ring of Aegis, Lord Sign, and the robes I just made. You will actually end up becoming really tanky as the monk build with big max health and a ton of physical and magical resistance. It probably goes without saying I maxed a lot of my skills here, so things like fortify skills to hand and block or to strength just weren't needed. So by that stage of the game, I created a singular buff spell that was just easier to use called The One. Is it a reference to the Elysian monotheistic deity, or is it a reference to Neo from the Matrix? That is for you to decide, but either way, it's a very powerful spell for our purposes. It will take most of our magicka to cast, but I've built in some really nice tricks. Firstly, this restores our fatigue for 20 points per second for 60 seconds, which makes us tireless. You will just not run out of fatigue with this, no matter how much blocking and power attacking you do. Secondarily, it will apply shield of 30% for 60 seconds, which takes our armor of 55 straight to the cap of 85. Don't forget that our resistance to magic is also 85%, which can be pushed to 100% if you like, because there's no cap for magic, but it doesn't really seem fair to me. But also, to this spell, I add a Fortify willpower by 100 points for 10 seconds. Why, you ask? Well, there is a nice fatigue bonus, I guess, but the main reason is magicka regeneration. It makes a huge difference to magicka regen, and this spell costs close to your whole magicka pool. So for that 10 seconds, we get insane magicka regen, allowing us to get that magicka back quick smart, ensuring that we have the ability to recast it when needed, and it allows us also to use other spells in combination very quickly. I realize this build's a bit shorter than the others, but there just isn't as much to explain for a monk build really. It's much more straightforward than the other build, just buff spells, punch, 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 push them, punch, 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 restore health, I guess. It's pretty straightforward. Ladies and gentlemen, that just about covers it. That was the monk build. Never give up, smack 'em hard and smack 'em again. Do it for the divines. Enjoy. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. It's been very fun diving into Oblivion Remastered and all the fantastic changes it's brought to the leveling experience, though I do dislike how unarmed is worse. Subscribe for more Oblivion builds, many more to come. Thanks again. My name is Scott from Fudge Muppet, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.